In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a counter-attacking tactic for a small team on Football Manager. Now, currently we're managing at Southampton. This is just the beginning of the save. And to be, Southampton has to be the worst Premier League team right now. And if you look at their club information, the way it's set up, they're predicted to finish in 19th place. And I think they're currently bottom of the league in the Premier League, and they've had a very terrible season. This video is going to be split into 4 parts. So first, we're going to look at the mentality that you need to actually create that counter-attacking system. Next, we look at the formation that you could possibly use, and after that we'll also look at the player roles that you need to select and also player roles that you need to avoid if you want to create a defensive counter-attacking system. And to wrap it up, we're going to look at team instructions that you can use to actually help your team play that style of play. Now, first things first is the mentality, and before we jump into that, we're just going to go into the club vision here for Southampton. Now, Southampton is I'm going to say, more of an expansive football club. Even though they are struggling in the Premier League right now, they're not really the type of team that plays a low block defensive style of play. And if you look at the board, they're actually expecting us to play a high tempo pressing style of play. And if you look at the supporters, they're expecting us to play attacking football and entertaining expansive football. So counter-attacking may not really be what Southampton really want to do, but currently the situation that they're in right now and the players that they have in their squad, you probably can only survive in the Premier League if you play a solid defensive counter-attacking system. So mentality-wise, while Southampton preferred to play an attacking style of play, the balanced mentality seems to be the best option right now. If you go all the way to cautious and defensive, you might get some odd good results here and there, but for the long term, it may not be very sustainable to actually play like this in every single game. The reason why that is because the mentality in Football Manager is not really a style of play. It's more of a measure of how much risk your team is willing to take in every phase of the game. Now, if you're playing in the cautious mentality, if you look at the way the description for the cautious mentality is written, in summary, it says here that the team is actually going to look to defend in numbers, but also look to break on the counter attack if they have an opportunity to do so. This is quite good for a counter attacking system because it means that as much as your team is going to try to defend, they will look to fly forward in numbers as well. Think of it as your team taking less risk than they normally would if they were just playing normally in a balanced mentality. So they won't try that many risky passes and will only do it when there's an absolute certainty that there's space for them to exploit. As you go all the way down to defensive and ultra defensive or very defensive, the team is going to take even less risk and try to slow the game down and protect their defense a lot more, keep the ball and try to not concede a goal. Going all the way up to the attacking and very attacking mentalities, the team is going to be willing to take a lot more risk and also suppress most of their defensive instructions and try to score a goal. And as you go all the way up to the very attacking mentality, the team is going to completely neglect their defensive responsibilities and take even more risk to try and score a goal. To play a solid defensive counter-attacking football, I will recommend that you start off with a balanced mentality. Now, when it comes to the formation, the 4-3-3 is not very suited for a counter-attacking style of play. I know I've had some success using a 4-3-3 to play counter-attacking, solid defensive style of play. It does work, but this formation is more suited to a possession-based style of play. That's because of the numbers that we have in midfield and the less players that we have up front to actually start counter-attacks. It took me a while to realize that having one striker for a counter-attacking system is not very effective. That's why formations like the 4-4-2 are all the most suited to play a counter-attacking style of play. If you can actually swap it to this formation, or you can push the central midfielder slightly backwards and have a flat 4-4-2, that could also work. I recommend the 4-4-2. I also recommend a back three system where you can have 3 central defenders and 2 wing backs like this, having some of them in this other region, and then you can have central midfielders, or you can have one central midfielder play as a defensive midfield position, have a lot of protection here in defense and a lot of people in midfield that could help you start counter attacks, and then you have the 2 players up front to lead the counter attack. One formation I would highly recommend as a small team in the Premier League looking to play defensive counter-attacking football is to actually play a 4-2-3-1 system. Now, you can have one player here. Technically, there will still be 2 as you have one attacking midfielder in this sense. You can have 2 central defensive midfielders to protect the defense, or 2 central midfielders, although I rarely use that in Football Manager. And then you can just push your 2 wide players to actually go there and stretch the pitch, offer some width, and then you have your flat back 4 in place to protect the defense alongside the 2 defensive midfielders. The reason why this works is because you have 6 players back that can actually help you defend, and these 4 players up front can be enough to actually start the counter attacks. Now, the 4-2-3-1 for defensive counter attacking is very different from the 4-2-3-1 that you're using for a high pressing style of play, but you understand that better when we look at the individual player roles that you can use for this system. Now, there are certain player roles that favor a defensive counter-attacking style of play. We're going to start off with the goalkeeper roles, then we'll look at the defenders and midfielders, and of course the center forwards. Now in the goalkeeping department, a standard goalkeeper on defend duty could work. All you have to do is go ahead into his player instructions like this and then try and ask him to take a bit more risk when he's in possession of the ball. You can also go into the in transition phase and then look at the goalkeeper in possession. You can ask him to distribute the ball quickly and also to either take long kicks or throw the ball long to anybody that can actually go ahead and receive it. If you're trying to play counter-attacking through the middle, you can distribute to a playmaker. If you're trying to play counter-attack through the wings, you can use to distribute it to the flanks. For now, I'm just going to allow him to distribute it quickly and also take more risk. Now, for other roles, you can actually use a super keeper on support or on attack duty. I think on attack duty is a bit more expansive. It has a lot more attacking expansive range, but I wouldn't really recommend this for a counter-attacking system. What I would go for is either super keeper on defend duty or on support duty. For now, I'm going to just leave it on support. For the central defenders, there is a misconception when it comes to some of the player roles that are in here. We're just going to start with the central defender, standard central defender. Now, if you look at the standard central defender, this player, based on his instruction, he has the ability to actually play very simple passes. So you can see that it helps to actually maintain possession in the team and lay off passes to more creative players. Counter-attacking wise, that could work if you have a deep lying playmaker that is inside the center of the pitch that can actually help you start counter-attacks. But in case you're in the lower league and you don't have a standard central defender, or you just want to hoof the ball long from the center of your defense, also you can actually go for a no-nonsense centre back on defend duty. This player is actually tasked with just clearing the ball out of the opposition defense, and it can be very useful if you're starting a counter-attack. So that clearance can go to somebody that is playing an attack that can actually continue a counter-attack. The role that I feel has the most misconception here is the ball-playing defender on defend. Now, this ball-playing defender is actually suited to a counter-attacking style of play, but the way Football Manager 2024 is kind of operating right now, the player tends to dwell on the ball too much. The difference between the no-nonsense centre-back's clearance and the ball-playing defender's long vertical pass is the fact that the ball-playing defender is actually going to spend a bit more time and play a more calculated pass. The issue with that is on Football Manager 2024, and even in real life, I guess, the ball-playing defender is going to spend a lot of time and dwell on the ball, which also leaves him prone to pressing. And if a player in the opposition team is actually very good at pressing, you can go ahead and dispossess the ball-playing defender and then you lose possession in a key area. So in order to use the ball-playing defender for a defensive counter-attacking system, you have to make sure that the player actually has the attributes to execute that role. Now, for the wide defenders, I do recommend that you play fullbacks in this position, but if you are playing, let's say, a diamond, for example, if you're playing a diamond 4-4-2 like this, you can actually go for wing backs on support duty or automatic duty. I think automatic sort of works best for a defensive counter-attacking style of play. That way your player's mentality is going to switch along with the mentality of the team that you're using. Roles like the complete wing back and also the wing back maybe on attack duty, I don't really touch this ones if I'm playing a defensive counter-attacking style of play. You can try the inverted wing back, but usually on defend duty. Support duty will only be recommended if you're playing a possession-based style of play. That way your wing back can actually get into the center of the pitch like this, but that's not what we're looking for here, so I just tend to avoid these ones. And then inverted fullback is only if you want to transform this into a back three, which sort of works well as a counter-attacking system as well. You can have a back three system and then have your fullback be a bit more adventurous and get all the way up, have him play on attack. So it can actually be a back three here, and then some 5 or 7 players can go up front and cause a lot of havoc in the counter-attack. Now in midfield, you want to have a combination of somebody that is actually going to protect the defense and hold his position in midfield, and another player that could actually go ahead and join the counter-attack. You can actually have a creative player in this position where you can use a deep line playmaker, the player that is going to protect the midfield and hold his position while playing counter-attacking expansive passes, and then you can have someone like a box-to-box midfielder in here which is going to join the counter-attack. One important thing when you're selecting roles for central midfield is if you have a defensive midfielder in here, you want to select a player that is not going to press the opposition that much. Now that's very important. You need to pay attention here. When you're playing a defensive counter-attacking system, your team is not going to be high up the pitch trying to out-press the opposition and try to get the ball back. They're trying to stay in a low block in a defensive shape, whether it's a mid block or a low block. They're trying to stay in that defensive shape and trying to protect their defense. If you're using a player like a ball-winning midfielder in here on support DT, or let's say you have a ball-winning midfielder here on support DT, and then you have somebody like an anchor man in here on defend, the issue with this is more often than not, let's say you have a central midfielder here on support, and then you have a ball-winning midfielder here maybe on defend DT. The issue with the ball-winning midfielder here being on defend DT is that he's going to actually be drawn out of position to try and press the opposition and try to win the ball back. That is very suitable if you're playing a pressing game and you try to win possession possession from the opposition. But if you're trying to stay in a low block and trying to protect your defense, the ball winning midfielder is actually going to be doing the opposite of that. So you're going to want to avoid having roles like this in a defensive counter-attacking shape system. That's kind of what they call it. There's a difference between a shape system and a pressing system, and the defensive counter-attacking system is normally a shape system, and the ball winning midfielder is not going to work well in that particular system. What I recommend you do here is to actually have a defensive midfielder on defend duty or on support duty, as this player is not going to be drawn out of position to try and press the opposition and win the ball back. Another good role for a defensive counter-attacking system is the anchor man. This actually is just going to stay in position, receive the ball, and then give it to another creative player. The anchor man almost never leaves the defensive midfield position, which is quite good for a shape system trying to protect their defense. When it comes to the wide players, you can use anyone you want. To be honest, you can have your players out wide like this. If you're trying to attack through the middle, you can use inside forwards and inverted wingers, but if you're trying to attack out the flanks, you can actually use wide players or wingers or wide midfielder on attack duty to play on this other side and have them exploit the space. You can use a combination of both, and that works quite well. When it comes to the center forward position, you're going to want to have an advanced forward in there. The reason why I say the advanced forward is good for the counter-attacking system is that it actually helps lead the line and start counter-attack. So in case your team is going on a counter-attack, the advanced forward is going to be well suited to run forward, spearheading the attacking moves and trying to get the team forward to try and score a goal. One role I would like to avoid when I'm playing a defensive counter-attacking system is the pressing forward on attack. Same reason why the ball winning midfielder isn't very good enough for a shape system, because he's going to be drawn out of position. The pressing forward is actually going to get drawn out of position trying to press the opposition's defensive midfielder or defenders to try and win the ball back. And if you're staying in a low block and you have a pressing forward, that's actually counterintuitive, because if you're playing in a mid block like this and you have much more often trigger press for some reason, crazy as that sounds, you have a pressing forward in there, he's actually going to go and hassle the opposition, leaving gaps for the opposition to actually play through you. So you could choose to have a different kind of player here. One of my favorite roles to actually do this is the trequartista, and I'll tell you why. As much as the trequartista is a flair role, notice that the trequartista does not have any defensive responsibility. So if you're playing in a cautious defensive counter-attacking system, the trequartista is actually the best role to lead the line forward, because he's actually going to just stay forward and not contribute to the defensive part of the game. The good thing to do is actually put somebody near him so that person can actually be involved in most of the defensive work, like an attacking midfielder here on support duty, and allow the trequartista to have that freedom in attack. This way, if you go ahead and win possession and you look to start a counter-attack, your trequartista are going to be up there trying to finish off chances and also lead the line creatively. Now for the team instructions, we'll start with out of possession instructions, then in transition, and then in possession. Now we've talked briefly about the mentality. I'm going to leave it unbalanced for now. If you look at the way the team is set up out of possession, what I do recommend for a defensive counter-attacking style of play is to actually have a mid block with a standard defensive line. Low block hasn't really worked that well for me in this game. I've tried it in different clubs. It didn't really help out. So mid block is actually what works. You can choose to have more pressing in there. It actually helps. But this to me was actually what gave me the best results, creating a counter-attacking defensive style of play. Now there are some other instructions you can look at here on the right. Tackling, I don't really select this except is based on the match scenario, because you can't go into every game trying to get stuck in. Sometimes the opposition could be better than you and you may choose to stay on your feet. So I tend to leave this blank for match scenarios. But for the defensive line, I choose to drop off usually towards the ending of the game, but more often than not I leave it the way it is and then try to watch the match and see if we need to actually drop off. The pressing trap, you could actually choose to go inside or outside, but again this is down to the match and the team that you're playing against. If you choose to trap your position inside, it means that you're trying to funnel the ball into the center of the area, so you have two very good defensive midfielders that can actually win possession back for you. Against a team that has a very good attacking midfielder, I will not try this option, because you're just sending the ball towards him and it can actually cause you a lot of problems. So in that scenario, you can choose to go outside in case you notice that the opposition has very weak wingers, that they're not very good at crossing. You can actually trap them outside and force them to go outside and then try to win the ball from there. So usually these ones are just in-game scenarios. Crossing engagement also, I tend to consider this as in-game scenarios as well. If you notice that you have two tall center backs that can actually win the headers, you can actually invite crosses. But if you don't have very good center backs and you notice the opposition have a tall striker, tend to stop those crosses before they even get crossed into the box. In transition wave, we've picked at the goalkeeper a little bit, but the only instructions I normally turn on here for the counter-attacking system is to actually have a counter selected. The counter press doesn't really help us in this case, because in this situation possession, you're actually going to want your team to get into their defensive positions. You can try regroup, but I think this is going too much. Counter press actually forces your team to break their defensive shape and try to win the ball back, which is not very helpful for a defensive counter-attacking system. Now for the team instructions, I tend to leave the attacking width on standard as you see it here, but against some teams that have very weak centers, you can go for a narrow defensive width, but what I like to do is just to leave it the same way it is. The only thing I tend to push here is the tempo, because I want my team to have a fast counter attack, and if you do have pacey players, you can go for a higher tempo or slightly higher tempo like this. I tend to just go for higher tempo. Passing directness is usually on standard because I noticed that actually helps us. The fact that we are in the mid block and we're also playing a counter attacking instruction in transition, the team is actually going to use the high tempo and try to start counter attacks very often. Since we're on a balanced mentality, you can actually choose to go for a slightly more direct passing. This actually works well as the team is not going to be too adventurous with their passing, but if you notice that you're losing possession too much and the play is breaking down, you can actually go to a standard passing directness and just keep the high tempo selected. The only other instruction I turn on in this case is to actually have the team be more disciplined. Depending on the player roles that you select, your players are going to run at the defense anyway, so there's no need to actually force that instruction. And then if you look at the final third, I don't even touch anything in this situation. I just leave it the way it is. My team could actually choose to hit early crosses or shoot. They rarely walk the ball into the box because we're playing with such a high tempo, so depending on the roles that you play, your team is just going to try to move the ball into the box and try to score as quickly as they can without just being too patient with it. So that is how I go about creating a defensive counter-attacking system for a small team on Football Manager. Now for this Southampton team, this is the squad that I've gone for. I only need to add the goalkeeper now, which is Ramsdale. We can then bring in Ramsdale and see that his attributes are actually suited. He can actually play as a super keeper on support and both a standard goalkeeper, but I've opted for a super keeper on support. I have two wide centre backs in Jan Bednarek and Bella Kotchap. The reason why I have Bella Kotchap on the wide side is because he has better pace and better acceleration, good marking as well. And I noticed that Howard Bellis has only pace 13 and acceleration 12, so I prefer him to be in the centre and then Bednarek actually be on the other side of the flank. But depending on how every game goes, I can go ahead and swap who plays where. For the wide players, I have Kyle Walker-Peters playing as a wing back on automatic duty and Charlie Taylor on this other side playing as a wing back on automatic duty as well. I could have had him play as a fullback, as you can see here is his preferred position. And I noticed we have a lot of defenders in this Southampton team, and Charlie Taylor has crossing of 15, so that actually looks good for somebody to play as a wing back on automatic duty. In defensive midfield, I have Jack Stevens, right? That's his name, right? Yeah, Jack Stevens playing as a defensive midfielder on support, and Will Smallbone is going to be the one offering some creative ability in here or creative passes. I could actually ask Stevens to play as a defensive midfielder on defend duty, but that is depending on the game. I think support is quite okay right now. Attacking midfielder on support duty is where Adam Lallana is going to be. I actually added some instructions to him to ask him to take more risk and also run from position, because I noticed that Lallana actually has some creative ability and experience to actually get around the pitch. So it's possible for him to actually be a bit more expressive and actually act like an additional creative source for us here in the number 10 role. Adam Armstrong and Ben Brereton Diaz are going to be the strikers. Armstrong is going to play as an advanced forward. He has the good acceleration and good pace. He can actually get up and down the field a lot. In case I want him to be on the flank, he could actually be on the flank as well, but this is just the first system that we're working with. Ben Brereton Diaz is going to be a deep line playmaker on support duty. I haven't really put much thought into his role, but I noticed that he has good pace and acceleration, but not much passing and vision, so deep line forward may not really be his role. For me, looking at his height, he could actually be a target forward on support duty, so that is probably a role I'm going to switch to now to give it to him. So he's quite good in this position. I'm just going to ask him to play as a target forward instead. And then I noticed that he doesn't really like to dribble less. He's a player that likes to run wide with the ball. So we could actually consider a different role for Ben Brereton Diaz. Since we can't ask him to be a target forward, I'm going to go for the complete forward on support DT. He has a lot more freedom to do what he wants now, and I think he has the attributes to actually do that as well without being much of a deep line forward on support DT. In the game against Chelsea, we played quite well. Of course, it's our first game of the season, and it's also an away game at Stamford Bridge against a top team like Chelsea, but we're able to win the game 2-1. It was closer than it actually looks, to be honest. From here, you can see that Chelsea actually had the dominant possession in the game. They had 2.62 XG and 16 shots, 9 of them were on target, but they were only able to get one goal, and that came from Christopher Nkunku in the 89th minute. Ben Brereton Diaz actually gave us the lead in the 17th minute, and for some reason I expected that as Chelsea went on to concede the goal, that the game would actually end 1-1, or maybe Chelsea would go on to grab the winner. But at that point, I had already switched from a balanced mentality to a very defensive mentality. And even then, we're still able to get the goal from Maxwell Cornet, who played as a striker for us after I took off Ben Brereton Diaz and brought on Cornet. Looking at our stats, we actually had 9 shots, 7 on target, and of course 2.11 XG compared to Chelsea's 2.6. They're the better team, so it's allowed for them to have more XG. But we had only 36% possession in that game, and all we had to rely on were good goals coming from. One was a set piece routine and the last goal was a pure counter attack. We do have more tough fixtures coming on, but this is the way you can actually go ahead and set up your team if you want to go against other top teams in the division and somehow get a point or even a win out of those games. You do have to set up the way that I've actually showed you, and you could actually go ahead and apply this to any other tactic that you want, and let me know how it works out for you.